have never felt truly like a woman, and I've spent a lot of my life not feeling like I fit in to being a woman. And I think for a couple years, because of that insecurity, I became almost like very pick-me about it. And I'd be like, well, I'm not like other girls because I don't, do this and this. And I've grown to be very resentful of that period of time.
Is 2015. In a small bedroom in Highland Park, Los Angeles, a 13-year-old girl records a song with her older brother. The recording equipment is modest. The room is not a studio. It is a bedroom.
Southern California, much like Arizona.
With a bed in it, next to a laundry machine. They are not trying to launch a career. They are not trying to change the music industry. They are trying to send an audio file to a dance teacher who needs something to choreograph. They upload the track to SoundCloud so the teacher can download it easily. They go to sleep. They wake up the next morning, and the song has gone viral. That track was Ocean Eyes. That girl was Billie Eilish Pirate Baird O'Connell. And what happened next was not just a career, it was a redefinition of how pop music is made, who gets to make it, what it is allowed to sound like, and what a female artist is allowed to look like, say, and feel in public. By the time she was 18 years old, Billie Eilish had become only the second artist in Grammy history to sweep all 4 major categories in a single night: Album of the Year, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, and Best New Artist. The only other artist to accomplish that in one evening was Christopher Cross in 1981. She did it with a debut album recorded almost entirely in that same bedroom. She did it without a conventional vocal training program, without a pop songwriting camp, and without a major label production team telling her what to sound like. She did it by being entirely, uncompromisingly herself. And in doing so, she did not just succeed. She moved the walls. Before music consumed her entirely, Billie was a dancer. She trained seriously and was part of a contemporary dance company in Los Angeles, committed enough that her early performances drew real attention. Dance was not a hobby. It was her primary artistic identity throughout her early adolescence. Then, in her early teens, she suffered a serious hip injury that ended her dancing career. What could have been simply a loss, and by her own account, it was a painful and difficult one, became instead a redirection. With dance no longer available to her, all of that creative energy, all of that physical and emotional discipline poured directly into music. The injury did not create Billie Eilish the musician, but it cleared the field. It removed the alternative, and it pushed her, earlier and more completely than might otherwise have happened, into the bedroom where Finneas was already waiting. This matters, because the sound she and Finneas developed together is, in many ways, a sound built from stillness and interiority rather than motion and extroversion. It is music made for listening closely, not for performing broadly. A former dancer who became a recording artist brought with her an understanding of how the body holds emotion, how silence can be as expressive as sound, and how a single held note can carry more weight than 1,000 words. That understanding lives in every track she has made. The upload to SoundCloud in 2015 was not a marketing strategy. It was logistics. Billie's dance teacher at the Revolution Dance Center in Los Angeles, Fred Diaz, had asked her to record something he could use to choreograph a lyrical contemporary routine. Finneas mixed and mastered the track himself, as he did with everything, and they posted it with a free download link so Diaz could access it. By the next morning, the song had spread far beyond any dance studio. Music blogs were embedding it. Listeners were sharing it without being asked. The response was immediate and disproportionate to anything a 13-year-old uploading a track to a free streaming platform should reasonably expect. Within a matter of weeks, industry figures were paying attention. By the summer of 2016, Interscope Records had signed her to their boutique imprint Darkroom. Ocean Eyes received a full major label release in November of that year, with a music video and a promotional campaign that introduced the world to a 14-year-old artist who already sounded like no one else on earth. In August 2017, Darkroom released Billie's debut EP, Don't Smile at Me. 8 songs, all written by Billie and Finneas, all recorded in the bedroom. The EP was not designed as a commercial event in the conventional sense. There was no single massive lead track, no carefully managed radio rollout, no calculated targeting of a mainstream demographic. What it had instead was a fan base that had been growing organically since Ocean Eyes. A generation of young listeners who had found the music on streaming platforms and social media and had adopted it with the kind of personal investment that no amount of promotional spending can manufacture. Billie's earliest audience did not feel like consumers of a product. They felt like participants in something. Don't Smile at Me reached the top 15 on the charts in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia without the infrastructure that would normally be required to achieve those numbers for a debut release from an unknown artist. The EP's success was driven almost entirely by word of mouth and streaming, by young people sharing songs with each other because the songs said things they had not heard said before in quite that way. Tracks like I Don't Wanna Be You Anymore and Watch dealt with anxiety, insecurity, and the specific emotional texture of being young in a world that watches you constantly and judges what it sees. They did not offer resolution. They offered recognition. That recognition was, for many listeners, enough. More than enough. When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? On March 29, 2019, Billie Eilish released her debut full-length album. When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? Was made almost entirely in Finneas' bedroom with the same setup that had produced Ocean Eyes 4 years earlier. The album cost virtually nothing to make by major label standards. It was recorded, mixed, and largely mastered in a domestic space with consumer-grade equipment. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. It debuted at #1 in the United Kingdom. It made Billie Eilish, at 17 years old, the first artist born in the 21st century to hold a #1 album. It was the first debut album to reach the top of the American charts since Norah Jones's Come Away With Me in 2002. The album's lead single, Bad Guy, was not the obvious choice for radio dominance. It was deliberately strange, a minimal beat, a playful bass line, a lyric built around self-aware irony rather than conventional emotional appeal. It topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 5 weeks. When it finally left the top spot, it was displaced by a remix of itself featuring Justin Bieber, which immediately returned it to the top. Bad Guy spent a combined 7 weeks at #1. Finneas accepted the Grammy for Producer of the Year at the 2020 ceremony. He had been nominated alongside Jack Antonoff, Frank Dukes, Flying Lotus, and Kanye West, producers who between them had worked on albums by Taylor Swift, Lana Del Rey, Ariana Grande, and Kendrick Lamar. Finneas had been nominated for a single release. He won. The speech he gave when Billie accepted Album of the Year has been quoted many times since, because it captured something precise about what they had actually done. We didn't write a speech for this because we didn't make this album to win a Grammy. We didn't think it would win anything. Ever. We wrote an album about depression and suicidal thoughts and climate change and being the bad guy, whatever that means. And we stand up here, confused and grateful. The night nobody expected. On January 26, 2020, at the 62nd Grammy Awards held at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, Billie Eilish won Best New Artist, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, Album of the Year, and Best Pop Vocal Album. She was 18 years and 39 days old. In the entire history of the Grammy Awards, only 3 artists have swept all 4 major categories, the so-called Big Four, in a single evening. The first was Christopher Cross in 1981. The second was Billie Eilish in 2020. Adele had won all 4, but across 2 separate ceremonies in 2009 and 2012. Billie did it in one night, becoming the youngest person ever to do so, and the first woman to accomplish it since the award show began tracking those categories. She was also the youngest artist ever to win Album of the Year, breaking the record previously held by Taylor Swift, who had won the award at 20 with Fearless in 2010. The Bedroom in Highland Park had produced one of the most decorated debut albums in the history of recorded music. Not in spite of its origins, but because of them. The uniform that was a statement. From the beginning of her public visibility, Billie Eilish wore oversized clothing, baggy hoodies, wide trousers, layers that made it impossible to read her body. In an industry where female artists have historically been asked, explicitly or implicitly, to market themselves through their physical appearance, this was not a neutral choice. She made that point explicitly and on the record. She wore what she wore because she did not want to be judged by how her body looked, and because she did not want to give anyone material for a conversation she had not invited. She also spoke openly, at an age when most teenagers are still learning to articulate their internal lives, about anxiety, depression, body image, and the specific pressures of being watched by millions of people during the years when a person is least equipped to handle it. She had Tourette's syndrome, which she disclosed publicly because she wanted to control the narrative before someone else did. She talked about the hip injury that had ended her dance career and the effect it had on how she saw herself physically. None of this was calculated vulnerability. It was simply the way she communicated, the same directness and specificity that made her lyrics land differently from the genre's conventions. And it had an effect. Young fans, particularly young women, described her music and her public persona as a kind of permission. Permission to be anxious in public. Permission to refuse the expectations attached to visibility. Permission to take up space in a way that had nothing to do with how your body was shaped. That permission was new. Or rather, it was newly visible at the scale that Billie Eilish was operating, and the industry noticed. The generation of young female artists who came after her, Olivia Rodrigo, Tate McRae, among others, arrived into a landscape she had partially remade, from a bedroom to Bod to Barbie. In 2020, Billie Eilish and Finneas wrote and recorded No Time to Die, the theme song for the 25th James Bond film of the same name. When the song was released, Billie became the youngest artist ever to write and perform a Bond theme. At the 2022 Academy Awards, No Time to Die won the Oscar for Best Original Song, making Billie, at 20, the youngest person ever to win an Academy Award for songwriting. 3 years later, What Was I Made For, written and recorded for Greta Gerwig's Barbie, won the same award at the 2024 Oscars. With that second win, Billie became the youngest two-time Academy Award winner in history. The trajectory from a SoundCloud upload intended for a dance teacher to back-to-back Oscar wins is one of the more extraordinary arcs in the history of popular music. But what makes it genuinely significant is not just the scale of the achievement. It is the consistency of the method. No Time to Die and What Was I Made For were both produced in collaboration with Finneas, both built from the same instincts and the same working relationship that had produced Ocean Eyes in a bedroom in Highland Park a decade earlier. The tools had improved, the rooms had changed. The essential nature of what they were doing had not. What she moved, the most immediate and measurable impact of Billie Eilish's success on the music industry has been the legitimization of bedroom production as a primary mode of commercial recording. Before Ocean Eyes went viral in 2015, home recording was understood by most major labels as a development stage, a place where rough ideas were sketched before being handed to proper producers in proper studios. After the Grammy sweep of 2020, that understanding became harder to defend. Finneas' Producer of the Year win was particularly significant in this regard, because the Grammy for production is awarded by and to industry professionals who understand exactly what equipment, budget, and infrastructure went into the nominated work. His win with a single album made in a bedroom signaled to every producer working in a professional studio that the infrastructure was not the point. The ear was the point. The instinct was the point. The generation of artists that followed Billie, Olivia Rodrigo, whose debut album Sao was built in a similarly intimate and self-directed process, Gracie Abrams, Conan Gray, all work in a landscape she helped create. They were not the first bedroom producers, but she was the first to do it at that scale, at that speed, with that level of sustained critical and commercial recognition, and to have it matter enough to shift what the industry considered possible. The streaming platforms also played a role here that cannot be separated from her story. SoundCloud in 2015 allowed a 13-year-old in Los Angeles to upload a track that reached listeners in every country, without any of the gatekeeping infrastructure that had, for a century, controlled the flow of recorded music. Spotify and Apple Music later gave that track a home on platforms where it could sit alongside major label releases without any visual distinction. The economy of music had already been changing when Ocean Eyes arrived. Her story became proof of what that change made possible. The voice inside the headphones. It would be incomplete to discuss Billie Eilish's cultural impact without discussing what she did for the conversation about mental health among young people, because that impact operates at a level that no award or chart position can fully capture. Depression and anxiety had been present in popular music long before Billie Eilish, but they had rarely been handled at the level of specificity and emotional granularity that she brought to them, and almost never by an artist who was herself still in the demographic she was speaking to. When she sang about suicidal thoughts on When the Party's Over, She was not an adult looking back at a painful past. She was a teenager describing her present. The difference is enormous, and her audience could feel it. Listeners, particularly young women and teenagers, described her music repeatedly and consistently as something that made them feel less alone. Not comforted in the sense of being told that things would be fine, but recognized in the sense of having their actual internal experience acknowledged in public, in front of millions of people, by someone who was going through it at the same time they were. This is what the best popular music has always done. It has named feelings that the listener did not know how to name themselves. But Billie did it at a moment when those conversations were particularly necessary, and at a scale that carried those acknowledgments further and faster than any previous generation of music could have managed. What a bedroom sounds like. Finneas O'Connell has said that the bedroom in Highland Park had a very specific sound. Tight, intimate, closed, quiet. He has said he loves the way it makes vocals sound. He has said that even as their career evolved and they could afford professional studios, there would always be recordings that had to happen in that room because no other room sounded like it. That specificity, the sound of a